Very good evening, good afternoon to all of you. Welcome to the IFSO APC webinar. We are honored today to present our guest speaker who's going to speak on the role of bile acids in the development of adenocarcinomas of the gastroesophageal junction. None other than the expert, Professor Rudolph Weiner, who I should introduce in a bit. Just a bit of housekeeping before we start the seminar. The session will be recorded. You can watch this if you're a member of IFSO on the IFSO Academy. If you aren't a member, then you can follow us on the IFSO YouTube channel, and we hope by tomorrow this will be launched. At the beginning and at the end, we would launch a poll. There are two questions that we would poll, and we would love to have and hear from you to understand better about the issue of bile acids and development of adenocarcinomas. If you have any questions during the session itself, please type in the question section, and we would be happy to answer those questions at the end of the Prof. Weiner's talk, when we will have ample amount of time for discussion. So our guest, Professor Rudolph Weiner, is without doubt one of the most revered bariatric surgeons in the world. Currently, he is the professor of surgery at the University of Frankfurt, and he's been an active surgeon. He has performed bariatric surgeries for the past 4 decades and has about more than 12,000 bariatric procedures under his belt. If you know a little about Professor Weiner, he basically founded the German Society of Obesity. He is the past president of the European chapter for IFSO from 2008 to 2010, and he then hosted the World Congress in 2011 for IFSO in Hamburg. He then went on to become the president of IFSO from 2014 to 2015. He's an honorary member of the ASMBS. He's published over 400 articles and scientific papers. He's got 10 books to his name and more than 20 chapters. Professor Weiner is an associate editor of the Obesity Surgery and a member of the editorial board of Surgery for Obesity and Related Diseases and 8 other scientific journals. It is indeed my great honor to have my panelists with me. We have, first of all, Professor Kazunori Kasama, who is a clinical professor of Oita University School of Medicine, Department of Surgery. He's the director of Weight Loss and Metabolic Surgery Center, Yotsuya Medical Cube. He's the immediate past president of the Asia Pacific Metabolic and Bariatric Surgery Society and the president of the International Surgery for Obesity and Metabolic Disorders, the IFSO APC chapter. He is well known around Asia and globally for his contribution in literature, largely from bariatric surgery in Asia, but specifically sleeve TJP. Next off, I have a great friend of mine, Kinloy. Kinloy is a specialist upper GI surgeon. He's the director at the St. George Obesity Surgery in Kogarah, New South Wales, Australia. He was recently accredited the Master Surgeon in Metabolic and Bariatric Surgery. He is the Honorary Treasurer of AUSANS, the Australian Obesity Surgery Society of Australia and New Zealand. He is part of the education and training positions in IFSO. He is the treasurer for IFSO APC as well. He has numerous publications to his belt, and he's been invited in many national and international meetings, and he's very loved throughout the Asia Pacific and global regions. I'm afraid our last panelist today may not be able to join us. It was Professor C.C. Wang. C.C. Wang basically founded the Chinese Society of Metabolic and Bariatric Surgery in 2012 and is currently the president of the Chinese Society of Metabolic and Bariatric Surgery. He is the president-elect for IFSO APC as well. He started the Chinese Journal of Obesity, published over 300 articles in peer-reviewed journal. With that brief introduction of the great panelist and the speaker himself, I would hand over the stage to Professor Rudolph Weiner to hear about his experience about the role of bile acids in development of adenocarcinoma of the G junction. Can we launch the polls first before we hand over the stage to Professor Weiner? All right, so the first question here we go. Please vote as you go along. Bile in the antrum is a high cancer risk and needs treatment with duodenal switch. That's the message. So please select any one of those. If you feel that surgery is ideally to be done within the first 12 months, or non-surgical treatment for such patients with bile binding agents and milk product, or you would choose to do just upper GI endoscopy for surveillance, or you don't believe and you believe that bile in the antrum is normal in up to about a quarter of the patients and that they would be well. Ken, while the audience is waiting, what are your thoughts about the topic itself? Do you think this is relevant to current clinical practice?
Well, I think it's pretty relevant because we've seen, I think, American doing a lot of bypass, but recently we've seen, especially the Middle East chapter, they're really pushing for OAGB, and same as in our Asian, I think Professor Lee is one of the pretty great advert investigator of the same topic. And I think a lot of people are hesitant, or American especially used to be hesitant because of that sort of risk. And that need to be demystified and look at it scientifically. So for Asian Pacific, I think the disease process could be different comparing to the Western countries. So we may have our own conclusion to draw as well. So I'll look forward to Professor Weiner's talk, and let's have a little bit of more insight to it afterwards, so we can help each other.
Thank you, Ken. So as we see that most people do come up with the proposition that bile in the antrum is normal and they wouldn't do, there are others who would then propose surgical intervention. So we'll see what happens after Prof. Weiner's talk. Can I get the launch for the second question, please? All right, lovely. So here is with relation to the gastroesophageal junction, we've got questions. Kusama, while the audience try and type in what they have for the polls, what is your take? You belong to a region in the world where there's a lot of gastric cancer and junctional cancer. So is that something that really is concerning Asia? Because I think Asia really is somewhere, but the West has seen a lot of gastroesophageal junction cancers, which are adenocarcinomas as well, probably higher in incidence as compared to the Asian population. So what are our concerns in Asia? Could you please enlighten us?
Yes, thank you, Asim. Actually, in Japan and Korea and China, we have a lot of gastric cancer, but it used to be a cancer in the distal stomach. But recently, we have many the junction cancer, gastric cancer in the gastroesophageal junction. So that the trend is very close. It's getting close to the Western country, so that we have to pay a concern of the bio exposure to that area too, like what happened in Western country. So that this webinar is very interesting to us, or even for us, the gastric cancer surgeon.
Thank you very much, Kusama, for those comments. And we have an interesting poll here. We see that bile in the esophagus and gastroesophageal junction is dangerous and needs treatments. And there is a yes for sleeve or OAGB into Roux-en-Y conversion with an alimentary limb of more than 60 centimeters. So most people would then come up to say that Roux-en-Y gastric bypass is one of the best options in order to prevent this bile reflux from happening. And so we have none other than Professor Rudolph Weiner to take over from here and educate us on this very important topic, and we'll follow his lead. Professor Weiner, over to you. Thank you very much.
So, welcome everybody to the APC webinar, and our topic today is the role of bile in the development of adenocarcinoma of the gastroesophageal junction. First of all, I like to show my it's not working. Sorry. My disclosure, IFSO disclosure, and you see from 1977, the first intestinal bypass surgeries in BBGs. I performed nearly all types of bariatric surgery. The main groups are sleeve gastrectomy, Roux-en-Y gastric bypass, and MGB, and it was also a period of abandoning between 1993 and 2000. Why we are talking about the role of bile in the development of adenocarcinoma of the gastroesophageal junction? Maybe it's a general interest at the moment. There's a rapid increase of MGB, mini gastric bypass, and OHGB, as one anastomosis gastric bypass worldwide. Maybe this is the background, because the bioreflux is a central topic of discussion, mostly discussed by certain who are not or never performed MGB. And also the sleeve as a leading procedure at the moment worldwide has shown a number of Barrett esophagus in the long term. So we have the data from Italy, from Genco, it's up to 70%. And then on the other hand, my personal experience, after more than 12,000 different bariatric procedures in 45 years, I have seen only 2 cases of the esophageal cancer. One was a Barrett after fundoplication, and the patient had a Barrett. We performed the fundoplication. It was no improvement. It becomes worse, and then we switched to Roux-en-Y gastric bypass, and 7 years later on, he developed a cancer, an adenocarcinoma. And then there was another case. This was just published 2 years before. It was a lot. People are a little bit became awake and crying. In one case of adenocarcinoma 2 years after MGB. But this was then my former hospital. I know the story, and there was a lesion before surgery, but the surgeon ignored this information, and it was published, yes, but it's not really true. You will see also later other reports that you have with upper endoscopy lesions, and later on you have cancer. Maybe then they need a stronger control in short periods. And we had now 4 cases of esophageal cancer after sleeve gastrectomy in Germany in university hospitals. And this was a round call, but they are not published. But you know, we had in this period more 150,000 sleeves and 4 cases of esophageal cancer after sleeve gastrectomy. There's no real significant increase because in contrast to the normal population. And in my personal experience, the Barrett, the de novo Barrett after bariatric surgery is not, I've never seen 70% like Genco or 11% Daniel Felsenreich from Austria. In my experience, it's markedly less than 5%. And I have done all my upper endoscopies prior surgery by myself. This maybe is my personal experience. No, there are 3 potential situations when you can see the bile in the esophagus and the gastroesophageal junction. Yeah? In a normal stomach, non-operated with a duodenogastral bile reflux and GERD, because bile in the antrum is normal, up to 26%, you can find in the upper endoscopy a small portion of bile in the antrum area. But if you have a GERD and bile is in the stomach, then you can see also the bile in the gastroesophageal junction area. And another topic is sleeve gastrectomy with duodenogastral bile reflux and GERD. We know that the percentage of duodenal gastral bile reflux is increasing. Normal population 26%, it goes up to 40% in sleeve patients. And if this sleeve patient has a GERD, then you have also the bile in the area of the gastroesophageal junction. And the main topic of today, of the discussion of some surgeons, is that with the ORGB, MGB, if you have incorrect anatomy, if you have a short gastric tube or you have a small anastomosis, you see in the small incidence, you see a bile in the gastroesophageal junction. And if you see bile, the yellow color in this region, you have to do not only just endoscopy, you have to correct the situation, because otherwise in long-term run, it's a higher risk point. You know, the total, what we are talking today about the gastroesophageal adenocarcinoma, this is an esophageal adenocarcinoma. And in the junction area, it's a rare type of cancer of the esophagus. But the esophagus, all of cancers of the esophageal region is the sixth leading cause of death from cancer, and the listing, a ranking list, most common cancer in the world. So, and especially the 5-year survival is low. Therefore, it's you need the best results. You can achieve the best results if you have an early diagnosis, so-called in early stages. You see, this is a little bit white on the left side here. Sorry, range of different percentages when you can see this in Eastern Asia or in Northern Europe, or so. There's a little bit the mortality and the incidence of this carcinoma is a little bit different. There's many influences of food intake, hot drinking, smoking, and other things. So the esophageal cancer, we have two different types. The squamous dysplasia is a precursor lesion of the esophageal squamous cell carcinoma, and the Barrett esophagus is a pre-neoplastic lesion preceding adenocarcinoma, mostly associated with GERD and obesity. This should be differentiated, these types. And in a GI junction, the adenocarcinoma is divided into 3 types. You know the classification by Jürgen Siebert from Munich. This plays in general for the role of bile, no, not important role. The main risk, there's a difference. The squamous cell carcinoma and adenocarcinoma, you see there's a little bit of difference in the location where we can see the tumors. It's more in Western Europe and United States, North America, Australia, we have more these adenocarcinomas. And this is risk point, is risk factor is GERD. And this is associated with obesity. So I believe that obesity is the background for the GERD, and the GERD is, the acid comes up with a reflux disease and sometimes the bile as well. You see also there's a little bit influence of tobacco or nicotine abusers. Alcohol plays a role for the squamous cell carcinoma. So we see that the Barrett and the GERD, they are the main risk factors. So the bile acids and the bile in general is a new focus. You know, we have a lot of influence, the role of bile in metabolism, for diabetes development, for the macrobiotica, for many other things, and also development of obesity. But we have seen the first proposed data which have shown that it's a carcinogen in the 40s of the last century. And in the last 25, or since 1980, we have more than at least 25 reports have shown indicate that bile acid causes DNA damage. DNA damage. And this is the problem. You have to understand the problem. Bile and the bile acids are produced in the liver. And then we have the liver synthesizes hydrophilic primary bile acids. And during the enterohepatic circulation, some of these bile acids are converted into hydrophobic bile acids. And there's an affinity of secondary bile acids to promote tumors. These are many data, experimental data have shown this. And there are different ways. The classic pathway is around 90%. It's based on cholesterol with a different step by using different enzymes into oxalic acid and desoxy acid. And also the microbiota make this change from oxalic acid to cheno. This is in the intestinal area, and then we have the enteropathic circulation. 10% have a shorter way on the right side, cholesterol. You see, this is the enteropathic circulation, and we have different type of 286 different types of bile acids. We know if you are prolonging the biliopancreatic limb in our gastric bypass surgery, then we have less absorption and less digestion of the nutrition. Because the bile is not only essential for the digestion, it's also essential for the absorption. In 1984, I published a book. This is in German language. Enterale resorption means, the German word means intestinal absorption. And here in the middle, you see a diagram. This shows a decrease of the absorption rate of dextrose and glucose as active absorbed substances if you have no bile in the intestinal lumen. This was in cases of obstructive jaundice. So with increasing bilirubin in the blood, a rapid decrease. Without bile and bile acids, you have no active ATPase active transportation through the intestinal wall, and finally no absorption. On the right, the diagram you show, this was studies regarding the bypass. What means bypass? This means the intestinal bypass, what we have done in the end of the 70s, the beginning of the 80s, and I performed at this time, a long time ago, more than 40 years, these studies about absorption. But therefore, I know that bile is a very important agent to organize the absorption, not only digestion. But the bile and the location, this is a different. Bile is not everywhere a risk point. Bile is normal. We need bile in many processes in our body. But the mechanisms to make a risk point for cancer development is probably indirect, involving induction of oxidative stress and production of reactive oxygen species. They damage then the DNA, and repeated DNA damage, like the increase of the mutation rate, including the mutation rate of the tumor suppressor genes and oncogenes. This is a way to promote tumors. And if you look into the GI tract, when we know, you see where the percentage, for example, the duodenum, duodenum is 100% of the bile acid they are present. Then you're starting the absorption in the duodenum, and the ileum becomes less. But in the right colon, it's normal to see bile. And if you're performing lower endoscopy, you see a lot of bile. But if the bile is in a high concentration in the left colon, there are reports about there's a cancer induction. And also, if it's more than 5% in the rectum, it's a risk point for cancer. The same, maybe we have less, 26% is normal to see bile in the antrum, in the lower part of the stomach. It is a risk point in the fundus, nobody knows. But in the esophagus, in the esophageal junction, it's a point of cancer induction. This is important. No, that's different. Not in general, bile a risk point for cancer. So this is the way, maybe also with a high fatty bile acid, you can organize, you can have an induction of oxidative stress, and this reactive oxygen and nitrogen species with DNA damage, and this adds the expression of tumor suppressor promoting genes, and then at end point is a cancer. This is an important thing. But we know that it's a high concentration. It's an endogenous etiologic agent for gastrointestinal cancer. So this is described in different papers here in the World Journal of Gastroenterology. This production of ROS and LS following the bile acid exposure. You can have this damage of DNA and disrupting of the cell membranes and the mitochondrial activities. This is well known and demonstrated in studies. But you're looking in the different tissues. Bile is circulating also in the blood during the enteropathic circulation. In different tissues and organs, it's the overexpression of IFXR, which is a factor which is regulated in the tumor or cancer expression, is different. You see it's protective in the prostate, in the colon, on the right colon, in the liver, but in the esophagus there are data which is alters the function of the genes regulating the cell growth, therefore it's promoting cancer. In some tissues it's more protective, and another tissue it's promoting, the same as in the pancreas. So there are some other potential risk points. You have cancer is promoted by interaction between alcohol, smoking, and also bile acid homeostasis. So there are a lot of fundamental things, but we know that it's a cancer risk point. So therefore, it's a clear answer. When the esophagus and the gastroesophageal junction, bile is a foe. We see on the at first the beginning on the left side normal esophageal squamous epithelium, and then you see that the bile acid and the bile salts both causing pro-inflammatory cytokine secretion, and this cytokine is altering the T lymphocytes, and finally you had a proliferation, and finally you have an injury of the epithelial cells, and yeah, this is an effect which is a risk point for development of cancer. Just a short view to the gastric tissue or gastric mucosa is the same point. If you have a high concentration, but the most risk point for the developing cancer in the stomach is the Helicobacter pylori infection, also in the remnant stomach. Yeah? This is clear and has a role in development of gastric cardia, adenocarcinoma as well. But if you have a high concentration of bile acid, you can have also the flux and the data about some publication implicating adenocarcinomas of the gastric cardia. This is important to know the same. Now, bile in the distal stomach, as stated before, is 26% as normal, up to 40%. But also the bile at high volumes causes bile gastritis, and this causes pain and chronic inflammation, and maybe it's also promoting the gastric mucosa cancerous. We have some data in the animal lab. And the high volume of the bile in the stomach causes problems, the same in the colon. This maybe we have some reports about bioreflux into the remnant stomach for the Roux-en-Y gastric bypass. The same will happen after MGB. We have chronic abdominal pain treated with, at the end point with remnants gastrectomy. But if you're looking for the hepatobiliary scintigraphy, this is with technetium. On the left side above on A, you see the activity during the synthesis of the bile acids of the bile. On the right side, under A, you see the concentration of the activity in the gallbladder. And lower part on B, on the left side, you see the decreasing activity in the liver, but on the right side, also B, the activity in the remnant stomach after Roux-en-Y bypass. So bile reflux is not only just a risk point for the gastroesophageal junction. It's after bypass surgery, it's also a risk point for the remnant. Just maybe we are not only focusing on this side. So maybe the risk point is higher after Roux-en-Y gastric bypass than in MGB because the remnant is much larger and there's a wide opening between antrum and the fundus region, and in contrast to the MGB, there's a small bridge. Maybe this is a helpful direction. So bile in the esophagus is a message as a cancer risk, and we have this publication from 2017. A lot of discussion, 70% in the study of Jenko with a follow-up of 51 months. This was a first publication, and this shows the sleeve has some, maybe it's one of the Achilles heels of the sleeve gastrectomy. If you're looking for the general cancer development, for example, this cancer incidence mortality patterns in Europe, there was an estimation in the Journal of European Journal of Cancer 2018 in 40 countries of Europe with the most common 25 major cancers in 2018. You have seen a little bit different difference between non-obese and obese, but it's a markable difference and an increase of cancers after bariatric surgery. And the largest, highest increase you have seen with the esophageal cancer, which was the blue column in contrast to the gastric cancer. And in this study, this was a research on PubMed with the keywords gastric esophageal adenocarcinoma and GIST and everything. You see at this time point where we have seen only gastric cancer after sleeve and also MGB and Roux-en-Y gastric bypass. There are no reports in this study from 2018 for esophageal cancers. This is not really true. We have older publication from Italy, Citana Scosari. They looked for and later found 33 carcinomas. This was also systematic review of English and in this time also French written literature and Medline and Embase database, and they found a large number of carcinomas, but at the end point we found 28 articles, and the mean time between the surgery and neoplasm was around 8.5 years, and the most common cancer was adenocarcinoma as well. And it was interesting, it was only 11 esophageal cancers and 22 gastric cancers. So it's surprising, it's a lower number of, in all the publications that we have seen, only 11 esophageal cancers, but impressive high mortality rate of 48%. We found there was a lot of symptoms we have seen of reported symptoms of the patient, maybe with dysphagia, food intolerance, vomiting, and so on. And therefore, we concluded that it is a critical importance to care for the evaluate any new or modified upper GI symptoms. But the question is that we have to discuss at the end, maybe it should be perform upper endoscopy after all bariatric procedures. So this updated data from Mario Mosella from Naples, from the University Federico II, about esophageal gastric and neoplasm following bariatric surgery in 2019. There was another publication before. It comes a little bit more. Now we have 28 esophageal cancers, and 2 GIST. GIST are much more. We have done ourselves a publication for more than 20 cases. And this most common was primary bariatric surgery was a restrictive procedure. And there was only just one case with a PBD. This is interesting, it's little slightly increased in related to the numbers of procedures, what we have done in Europe and worldwide, it's a very, very small number. So this was the Mosella, the first publication 1 year before. You see, it was all the time adenocarcinoma. And you see also the case highlighted the screen of the esophagus, but different procedures. It was Roux-en-Y, open Roux-en-Y, BBG, open sleeve gastrectomy, but in the sleeve, there was no, in this study, no carcinoma of the esophageal junction, and at this time, no adenocarcinoma after MGB. Was one case of the excluded stomach, of the remnant. It's interesting. But we have also another new from this year, 2021, from China. It's a supergastric cancer after sleeve gastrectomy. Also another systematic review of case reports. And they found 17 esophageal gastric cancers after sleeve. And there was 4 of them were esophageal cancers and 4 gastroesophageal cancers and 9 gastric cancers. But all the time the same, around 90% adenocarcinomas. But related to all the publication, it seems to be not a rapid high increase. Maybe as one case report now was shown. It's interesting to see when adenocarcinoma Barrett is because after sleeve gastrectomy, a case report, a literature review. I looked at this paper and finally we have seen before the surgery was done a Barrett, but this was not no dysplasia and biopsy. And then because we had never controlled it after 2 years, so after 5 years we detected then this tumor and we removed this adenocarcinoma. That is also 3 years later. Yeah. So the question is, does sleeve gastrectomy increase risk of Barrett esophagus? Yes, in small series, it's no evidence like this paper. And from this year, it's just a study of one clinic with 5 years follow-up rates, only 45%. So the conclusion in this at the moment, in 2021, the development of esophageal gastric cancer after sleeve is still not well defined, and but it may occur at any time. So, but there's no significant high increase of cancer after obesity surgery at the moment. It's important to know there's no significant high incidence of cancer after. Whereas many cancers are decreasing, but no increase of esophageal or gastric cancers, a high increase. Bile in the junction is a full need treatment. That means Roux-en-Y gastric bypass, and we need the upper endoscopy. So before and after surgery and the follow-up, this is essential to order to allow for prevention and early diagnosis. So and then we need further epidemiologic studies for the sleeve and the same for the MGB. So the take-home message. Bile esophagus in the esophageal junction is in wrong, the bile is in the wrong place and causes a problem. And there's a clear indication if you see bile in the esophageal junction, then you have to do a treatment with Roux-en-Y. That's just a publication from Felsenreich has shown this. The incidence decreases after all types of gastric surgery slightly, but no statistically high increase. So the endoscopic control should be performed, and the time interval is discussed. Therefore, the open question is how does this endpoint, and we can discuss many, one can answer to many questions, but how high will be in the follow-up rate in such a long period of time? Can we achieve this in our practice? And who should perform the upper endoscopy? Maybe also the bariatric surgeon. We are doing this in our clinic. The next question, who pay for the follow-up examination? And maybe also the open question is any hope for a bile binding drug? Maybe also. So let's make an invitation. Since 1998, I was organizing the Frankfurt meeting, live surgery meeting, as this is now organized by my daughter Sylvia, and it will happen this year with a present meeting and also as a online event in November. You are welcome. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm open for all the questions, and thank you, Manuela, for organizing this APC webinar. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much for that lovely talk, Professor Weiner. Let's kick off the discussion session. Let me share my webcam, and there I come in. Lovely. Thank you very much, Professor Weiner. That was really a lovely talk. I'm sure my panelists would agree that we do see gastroesophageal junctional cancers on the rise in Asia, in Asian populations. Not as much drastically, but there is a trend towards migration of distal cancers to more proximal cancers in Asia. Inherently, we see a difference in incidence in the Caucasians versus the Asians in occurrence of junctional cancer. But on that part of the world, which is Europe and America, sleeve gastrectomy has been around for much more longer durations than it has been. And as you rightly pointed out, we have not seen an exponential rise in the adenocarcinoma numbers that have been published. So are we trying to say that these patients who have sleeve gastrectomy are not getting bile reflux? Or are we trying to say that the quantity and quality of bile reflux is different in these patients? Can I have your comments? And then I'll pass to Kasama and Ken for if they have any questions while we wait for the audience who can type their questions in the chat box and we can answer these. So Professor Weiner, please, if you could comment on that.
Well, what we have to respect, when we have a long time interval, but we know from the biliary resection, it takes maybe 20, 25 years or more to have to develop a carcinoma after this types of gastric surgery. I remember one of the last reports was last year from Japan. It was a 93 or 98 years old lady, and we had 40 years before biliary resection for benign disease, and she developed a stump cancer. Most of the stump cancers are related to carcinoma surgery, but this was after a benign surgery. So if you're doing this, maybe you need a longer time interval. Therefore, it's important to know what are the risk points, and we have to check the patients maybe after all sleeve and bypass surgeries between 5 or 7 years to see is any bioreflux or Barrett, and if it's so, we have to react. If there's nothing there, then we can wait again 5 to 7 years. But this is a large task to perform all the controls in which our patient.
Thank you. Kasama, do you have any question, any comments? We can't hear you, Kasama. I can't hear you. No, I'm unable to hear you. Can you hear Kasama?
Yes, I can hear you. I think,
Lovely.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Weiner, for the great lectures. It's very informative to us. And I totally agree with you that the bile is a carcinogen, so that we have to pay our concern to the bile reflux to the esophagus. After sleeve gastrectomy, we have a lot of reflux, but almost all of them can be treated well by PPI. So that means the reflux is a majority of the reflux is an acid reflux, not bile reflux after sleeve gastrectomy. But do you think it's also pay attention to the patient who had acid reflux, which PPI works very well to treat the symptom for the occurrence of cancer after sleeve gastrectomy? Do you think it's very high that the ratio is higher than we thought, or just a bile acid? I mean, the acid reflux is not that much to pay attention. So, what's your opinion?
But the problem is we have seen that the duodenogastral reflux is increasing after sleeve gastrectomy. So if you have the bile comes from the duodenum into the antrum, and you have this mixture between acid and bile will go up, then you have maybe a higher risk. And you cannot feel, you have the pain of the acid, but your bile doesn't feel. If you have maybe bitter taste, then it's too late, yeah? So therefore we need a control, and the incidence of reflux de novo is high. It's around 30% after sleeve gastrectomy. And when you have to make a decision, a lifelong, young patients to have a lifelong PPI medication, you have so many other side effects for lifelong, maybe a risk point for osteoporosis and so on. So maybe you have to find another thing and find a decision to convert to a bypass surgery.
Good.
Thank you very much. I'm just following up to.
I'm sorry?
Kasama, go ahead. Go ahead, finish.
So, even after the patient well treated by medication, we have to be very careful for the cancer after sleeve gastrectomy. Thank you for very informative answers.
I'll come to Ken in a minute. I have a question on board from John Grieve, and he's asking that it takes about 25 to 30 years in patients who go through distal gastrectomy to develop cancers, and yet would this be something of concern in patients who are going through OAGB, especially at a young age? So if we are doing 30 years old and they have 40 years to live, will we be seeing an increasing incidence of cancers in this because it's purely a Bell-Roth 2 type reconstruction? Professor Weiner, for your answer.
This is absolutely true. Yeah. We know that, but the reports, if you're looking in Medline, PubMed, and you're looking for some cancer, gastric cancer, stomach cancer after gastric surgery, you find approximately 2,500 publications. 2,500 publications. And then looking at all, they had a cancer surgery before. So if you, and this was also the time in the time as we had the Bill-Roth procedures. There's this very small number of reports of long-term interval development of gastric cancer of benign diseases. Last one was this from Japan 2 years before. And then you can look, but this is a long time interval. This was a lady, and this was a time interval of 45 years. So in Germany, we had from the history, from the literature, we know it's around between 15 and 25 years, a time interval. So therefore, it's a recommendation because you see the risk points, the lesions, and if you have a dysplasia and so on, then the recommendation should be after all types of gastric surgery for benign diseases and malignant diseases to perform an upper endoscopy control. Leave patients, MGB patients, also Roux-en-Y patients. Then looking for the data from Mario Mosella, you find also after Roux-en-Y gastric bypass cancers, but the cancer in the remnant you cannot detect it by this way. I believe what we learned from the remnant that Helicobacter pylori eradication before of any type of bariatric surgery is essential. This is a very, you need the upper GI before and have to test it, and you have to make an eradication. If you have done the surgery, my recommendation is after 7 years to have a check-up control. And if you have some lesion dysplasia, Barrett, or bile, then you have to make a decision. Maybe first of all a control, and otherwise then to switch to another procedure or to correct. Sometimes it's also what I've seen with the acid reflux. After sleeve, you can have a sleeve migration. You can have too wide sleeve, too much acid production, and there are some other backgrounds. Not in general. You have to find what is the reason. And, if you don't find the reason, then you make you can wait and make a decision.
So, Professor Weiner, just to carry on with that discussion, Harry Frydenberg then asked, would you then change your procedure to a SADI's procedure to avoid all these problems of developing adenocarcinomas? You change to a SADI's where there's no more bile going back and duodenum is still competent.
No. The SADI is a better idea. Just regarding reflux, I switched SADI's back to MGB. It's easy to perform because the SADI is consisting with a sleeve and you have the acid reflux problem. And the only thing what you not have, if you do it correctly, is the bile problem. But the acid problem is and we published this reports in a journal about the switch from SADI to MGB because they have a case of acid reflux. Acid. It's a high pressure zone. No? It's a sleeve.
Yeah.
So if you do another, for example, another procedure, you add a limb to make it from a high pressure system to a low pressure system. This maybe it can help, but the bile comes into the stomach in this way.
Thank you. Ken, for your kind comments.
Well, it's very interesting. I guess everyone have their own experience, isn't it? I think I clearly remember my old professor saying that bile is 10 times worse than acid. That's really stick to my mind. Just mainly for comment, there's a few interesting observations recently. I mean, being a cancer surgeon, I do minimal invasive esophagectomy. And when I look at my cohort of patients, predominantly they are male patients. I would say probably about 70% to 30% versus. And bariatric surgery, as you know, predominantly in the world are female patients. So we're in the different risk profile. I remember giving the similar talk of Barrett's in the Russian IBC and was saying that it's like a Russian roulette. Basically, you taking your chances if you're not studying it carefully. And I think the IFSO position statement in Europe coming out that of the recommendation we should do endoscopy beforehand, whether it's practical or not practical. So I think if it's not practical, then we should have any excuses to scope our patient to at least identify the one at risk and follow them up. I mean, I think the symptoms of Barrett's or symptoms of reflux sometimes bear no relevance to the Barrett's or what the length of Barrett's is. And my only cancer patient I have, ironically, is in a gastric bypass patient 7 years afterwards. And I did minimal invasive surgery afterwards. It was an early lesion as well. But the worrying trend I have, Professor Weiner, is I think there's a trend that pushing for a long BP limb and a shorter elementary limb bypass that potentially might also make expose patients to more bioreflux, possibly. And the second thing is cholecystectomy are very common after bariatric surgery as well. That might alter the bile flow as well. What do you think about that, Professor?
Yeah, I have to add at the moment, there's only one procedure you can have a guarantee that you have no bioreflux. Only one. This procedure called duodenal switch. And I performed this procedure for some cases without any obesity, with severe bioreflux, with severe biogastritis. They came from different countries, and I performed just the duodenal switch without sleeve gastrectomy, just the duodenal switch to prevent bioreflux. The SADI is no guarantee to prevent bioreflux because the pylorus function, we know, is a wide difference. And if you have always open pylorus, you have also this is because you have different types of pylorus function. You have the pylorus with always closed. You have a pylorus with opening, and one is still always open. And if it's always open, the bile comes also in the SADI into the stomach. There's no guarantee. We have seen this. After cholecystectomy, we have studies. The number or the percentage of duodenogastral bioreflux is increasing. There are some studies. There are older one, and but you know this. from 26% up to 40%. It's the same like with the sleeve. With the sleeve, we have also an increase of duodenal bioreflux. So the only way to be sure that we have no bile into the stomach, then it's the duodenal switch. But the duodenal switch is such a complex procedure, and you can, maybe the main indication is weight loss. I performed 400 duodenal switch, and I'm very happy with my patients. It was a Rolls Royce of the procedures. But it takes 2.5, 3 hours, sometimes more, and with higher BMI, more than 4 hours is stressful. It's stressful, and so therefore there's at the moment no need. But only if we have a bile problem, then the duodenal switch is the last option. And this was developed by the Mr. This was the development for super bioreflux. That's only one of it. And
thank you.
Just a last word: the alimentary limb should be at least 60 centimeters. If you do an alimentary with 50 or less, you can have all the bioreflux. And prolonging the bilipancreatic limb is causes you have more enterohepatic circulation. The bile will be absorbed in the bilipancreatic long limb before they met the nutrition. And this causes better malabsorption. And sometimes the malabsorption can be dangerous. Up to 3% in the MGB, you have malnutrition. But then you have to measure the total body limb length to make a decision. So I perform MGB typically with 150 centimeters, but never more than 200. Never more.
Thank you very much for that. Professor Weiner, one last question, and this is from Professor Jack Himpens, and he's asking that if you do use bile binding agents like cholestyramine, do they have any bad effects on the esophagus itself? Any deleterious effects?
I have never seen, I tried this cholestyramine several times, 20 years or 30 years ago. I never met a patient who tolerates this treatment. Maybe may have new added, but it is not acceptable to drink this solution or to have this medication. Maybe we need another. If it's cholestyramine, it's a disaster. Nobody is. If you have one dosage the next day, nobody will take the second one. It's a terrible. So this is
yeah.
At the moment,
thank you very much.
Maybe in the future, Jack, we hope then we can add this medication. Or at the moment, nothing is available.
Manuela, if you don't mind, can you launch the poll again? And while the audience is taking the poll, I have another question for Professor Weiner. Professor Weiner, there are hydrophilic and there are hydrophobic bile acids. What is your thoughts about interaction of these hydrophilic and hydrophobic bile acids with the gut microbiome in the world that we live today, where we're studying gut microbiome left, right, center? What do you think is the role in obese individuals in developing these adenocarcinomas in our patients?
In the microbiotic, we changed also the bile acid from conjugated and deconjugated forms, and the last one is a more cancerous. Therefore, it plays a role. Maybe it can be influenced by influencing or changing the microbiome. But this is a real very difficult, because in the last 40 years we learned so much about bile acid. At first we know only conjugated, non-conjugated. Now we see all the different types, and we isolated 286 different bile acids, and we don't know what is the function of each. So finally, this is a mechanism. This is in the development of the human beings, around 100,000 of years, a well-established mechanism. And if the bile is in the right place, we have no risk point. We have only just to avoid that the bile will come into the left colon or goes up on the wrong place, stomach or an upper part, and then it's a foe. Totally, it's a friend. The bile is a friend. We cannot exist without any bile.
Thank you very much. So I think kind of safe zone is Kasama, sleeve with sleeve with the DJB procedure where you're relatively safe. Well, I have the comments from Kasama. Manuela, please could you launch the poll again? The end poll question. Yeah, Kasama, please go ahead while the audience poll.
Thank you. So there is a two methods of reconstruction of the DJB. It's a loop and Roux-en-Y. So that the Roux-en-Y is a little bit technical, difficult, but regarding protection of bile acid, Roux-en-Y is better. But I have some question that I would like to ask our panelists that do you inform patient about adenocarcinoma after bariatric surgery? Actually, I haven't done, but I think it's better to do. What's your opinion?
Ken.
Well, I think you have to throw in all the other risk factors for esophageal cancer, including male smoking and all the other factors to come in calculation. So essentially, I think after looking at all the evidence, you scope as much as possible and you find any excuse to scope. I think this is relevant for our APC region because I think China and a lot of countries, we're starting to do fair amount of bariatric surgery. And as some of the people asking questions, there's a lag time behind of what we see in the disease or not. And my worry, another thing is sometimes the article are because they are so rare, so they reported as case history. And sometimes it may be reported in a foreign language like in China or in Japan journal and etc. That might allow us to underestimate the real incident. Although the incident it is not high, but it's existing, just like the risk of Barrett's transforming to esophageal cancer is depending on the length of it and also the histological diagnosis. And you can only get histological diagnosis by doing endoscopy. My question to Professor Weiner is, how can we quantify bioreflux? Because exit reflux you can study with biopsy, Barrett's, Bravo, pH manometry. Bioreflux is the biosynthetic. But is there any other reliable method that we can just simply by looking at endoscopy seeing some bio inside? Is that enough?
Yeah, we have at least 8 different mechanisms to detect bile, but we are not everywhere available. And we know also for the reflux diagnosis, billimetry, it's very expensive. It's rare. There's not enough capacity. And finally, I believe if you see a yellow color, then it's clear. If you have patients, you cannot find out what are the reason for some side effects and symptoms. Then you have to send the patient to a special gastroenterological lab and to perform also bile testing. But this is it's not easy. It's different ways by chromatography, and we have different options. But it's not easy to available. It's easier to make a measurement for the pH, but not for it's a pH low. Maybe you can suspect there's a little bit influence of bile and can send the patient to the gastroenterologist. But the capacity in the hospitals is small to detect bile.
Thank you very much, Professor Weiner. So we can see that your great education has pulled number 2 and number 3 into number 4 answer, and that's a great achievement. We now can safely say that bile in the antrum is normal, and it's the quantity and quality of bile that reaches the junction that actually makes the difference. Manuela, if you don't mind, could you launch the second poll for us while we keep going with Professor Weiner? In the ideal world where we are talking about these, would we thus then make a very strong recommendation here that we need to have preoperative investigations in terms of endoscopy for our patients? and we should do post-operative endoscopies on a regular basis for patients who are at higher risk procedures like OAGB and sleeve gastrectomy. Professor Weiner, and the participants, please vote. Can I have your comments, Professor Weiner, on that?
Please repeat short the question.
So my question is, should we then mandate endoscopies for people undergoing sleeve gastrectomies, OAGBs, which are considered to be procedures which are prone to developing cancers?
Yes, as I inform all my patients, but in general, many types of cancers with a chronic inflammation and a loss of fat tissue, the cancer risk is lowering, except the cancers in the esophageal region. And I ever give a recommendation, if there was no lesion before, to come back 5 to 7 years and to perform a new upper endoscopy. And I do it in all my patients, and I have a follow-up rate only just from 75%, but I can see all my patients, and sometimes I detect patients with I see the yellow color or some signs of yellow, and then I will repeat the upper endoscopy, and then if still the same, I will give the recommendation to make a correction anatomically by surgery. I'm afraid that the bile in the long-term run can cause this problem. But this is the information that you need the patient. Otherwise, he will not come. He will not come.
Thank you very much, Professor Weiner. Can we close the polls, please? Lovely. Let's see where we are. All right. So elementary limb more than 60 centimeters. That's something that we learned. No just endoscopy control. So now people are disagreeing. So we have a bit more consensus now as compared to our initial time. So that's really made us make a difference. Thank you very much, Professor Weiner. All it takes now is for me to thank all the participants who have joined us at this IFSO APC webinar, to thank all my co-panelists with me for their active participation, to all those guys who put in lovely questions to ask, and most importantly, Professor Weiner for spending his afternoon with us and giving us such an insightful thoughts. Thank you very much, and thank you for the Secretariat, and we look forward to seeing you in the very near future, everybody. Thank you. Have a great evening.
Miami for IFSO, yeah, I hope so. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
So Miami.
Bye-bye.
See you. Bye-bye, Prof. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Take care.